Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here today with our very special guest from New Hampshire, Thomas Moore. Thomas is a psychotherapist who has written more than 20 books on psychology, spirituality, and myth. And her books have been translated into more than 30 languages all across the world. And you have also written, maybe that wasn't your first book, but the book Care of the Soul was the New York Times bestseller for many years. So welcome, Thomas, and thank you for being there.
No, thank you very much, Renata, for having me, for inviting me. It's such a treat and a special moment for me. Thank you.
The book which took my soul was Soul Therapy. This is my favorite of your books, maybe because the title itself, when you claim that you care for the soul and you go into the therapy looking for the soul, not for the character, not for the behavior, not for action or all those childhood strategies, but you always look for the soul, which is inside. I guess that brought me from a very first sentence. And would you mind telling us, how did you happen to care for the soul? Where did it come from?
I don't know. It's sort of one of these things that comes into your life that shapes your life. And I can't say exactly where it came. I was a monk in my youth when I was very young. I was a monk for 13 years. And I heard about the soul all the time then, but it was different. It was more within a spiritual context alone. And then many years later, I began to read Carl Jung, who wrote about the soul more as an interior aspect of a person. It's not always interior. He did say that, he said an interesting thing. He said that the soul is not in us, that we are in the soul. So I think what that implies is that it's not really something that we possess so much as that we are part of, and it's in the world as well. Like if you're in a family, you're probably discovering soul in your family. Or if you're doing work that is meaningful, you will also discover soul there. So it's kind of inner and outer at the same time.
So I guess the Buddhism talks about this awareness that just is all around us, and we are just part of it. We feel separate and we think that somehow I have this own myself, but then Buddhism says that, we all belong to the same awareness. So do you think it's similar what you just described about Jung saying that, soul is just this big, huge entity into which we all belong somehow?
I think it is similar, although my guess is, I'm not a Buddhist, but I've studied Buddhism for all my life, it seems. I would think that the Buddhist would be afraid of saying that there is such a thing as the soul. It doesn't really exist as something. But I don't think that either. Well, maybe in a very small way, it's a thing. It is something. You do experience it as a thing. But it's more like you were saying, it's more like this is what's all around you. And if it has these certain qualities, I think that has to have certain qualities like intimacy and a deep meaning. Depth is a big word for soul, and it may not be in Buddhism. It's other things like family is full of soul. You could say, like when you gather with your family in that special sense you have while you're with them, you could describe that as a quality of soul. There are many things like food, when you're making food or eating together with other people, you might sense that there's something going on here. It's not high elevated into the high spiritual realm. It's down deep into what really makes you feel like a human being.
So how do we recognize it? I mean, how do you know that, oh, we are in touch with the soul or family or my own or the universe or, people who are around me? What like what qualities does it have? How do we know that, oh, this is the soul? Because
Well, you don't recognize, you can't be absolutely certain and say this is the boundary, this is soul, and this is something else, because we're talking about things that are mysterious and that overlap and don't have real clear definition or boundaries. That's just the way it is. And we have to, I think, have to be able to think that way instead of asking for all this too much clarity. You have to be able, that's why in the soul we speak with poetic images, and dream is very important. Now, these things are not so defined and clear, but they have a depth to them and a mysteriousness that is equally important.
How do we distinguish maybe soul from is soul related to religion? I mean, can we talk about, you know, the soul as it's presented in religion, and can we talk about like soul without religion?
Well, that's a really good question. There's a lot of people, when they hear the word soul, they think of it in religious terms. And you can, because as I said, when I was a monk, I heard the word soul all the time, but it was something very different. You wanted to save your soul, and you wanted to, I don't know, keep it pure and clean and all that kind of thing. But that's a little different. When you see the soul through the lens of spirit, you're looking at it differently than from the lens of the psyche. That is the world that we live in, and this deeper soul that I'm talking about. It's different. So the soul that I write about in my books, it's not entirely removed from religion, but it's not really that spiritual. I don't use that spiritual lens. I use a psychological, emotional, relational lens, and say that this really is soul embedded in life, having to do with our families especially, and our loves, the people that we love and the things we love, the work we love. You can feel that there's something there. The ancient philosophers said that the soul makes us human, and the spirit helps us transcend our humanity, to go beyond what is human, like, you know, thinking about eternal things and the great universal values and those things that are beyond the human to really be able to know entirely. But the soul is very ordinary in a way. It's like you encounter it while you make lunch. You know, it's a very simple thing. Or you go to a restaurant with a friend. That can be a very soulful moment. And you feel it when you leave. And it doesn't have that same weight of meaning that the spirit has. Spirit kind of really, that spirit in us wants to know a lot and achieve and get somewhere. Soul is really happy to be sitting down, eating, and not worrying about things. It's a very soulful moment. I feel that our world has more spirit than soul. And that's why I write all these books about soul. I am known as a spiritual teacher or leader. And I guess that's true, because I do have that in me. You can do both. But because I think the soul is neglected, that's what I emphasize in my books.
So that's why you write a lot about soul, because you feel it's neglected, and we are more into the spirit idea than into soul.
Yes, exactly. So I think we are more of a spirit-driven people in our world today. Like even, you know, a perfect example of it would be an emphasis on sending rockets to the moon or to Mars. That's that spirit getting off the earth and flying. And we fly around a lot. We fly from one place to another. And we have a kind of spirit, not so literal, but a kind of a flying spirit where we want to know so much and be in communication in a kind of invisible way. So much Zoom talk now is not exactly, I think you can make it soulful, but but it's a little more difficult than if we were sitting together, let's say, someplace having a cup of tea. That might be a little more soulful.
How did you come to discover for yourself that difference between soul and spirit? Was it inspired by Carl Jung too, or is it your own?
Yes, it was inspired by Jung, although Jung didn't write about it very clearly. He did write about it. He has the main thing that struck me in Jung is that he in one of his books, one of his alchemical books, he gives a picture, an alchemical picture of a deer or a stag, and then next to it is a unicorn. And he says in his book that the stag represents the soul and the unicorn represents the spirit. And the unicorn has this one horn. So there's something about the unity, wanting unity and focus, the one answer to everything. That's very spirit-minded. The stag has all of these antlers going in all different directions. And that complexity and that multiplicity is more of the soul. So that image was most important to me from Jung. When I first saw that, I meditated on it. I thought about it a lot. And it's been with me now for many, many years. Then my friend, James Hillman, who was a Jungian, who went his own direction in his own way with Jung. He was Jungian all his life, but he did it in his own way. And he was very close. We were very close friends. And we worked together a great deal. So I was much influenced by him. And I chose to be with him because I liked what he did with basic Jungian thinking. And James wrote an article, a long time ago, called Peaks and Veils, which is about the distinction between soul and spirit. And he goes into all the possible ways they are different. So that article of his had a very big impact on me. I remember reading it over and over and over again because it took me a while to get it, that he was distinguishing between soul and spirit. And I didn't get it for a long time, but then finally it got through to me, and that became very important in my own writing.
So there are lots of parents listening to us, and if we try to imagine just for a couple of moments, how do we care for our children's souls? Because we try to do so much for our children, like we care for what they eat and what they do and their activities and everything. But then if there's this children's soul, how do we care for it? How do you even know, where to begin and how to do that?
It's really a good question. It's one that I'm very interested in. I've wanted to write a book on parenting for a long time because it's so important. And I think that caring for your child's soul, there's so many aspects of it, but one of them would be, it's about the parent, how you feel. What is your attitude toward your children? If you want them to be perfect, and so you get all upset when they do things you don't like, that's not really caring for their soul, because it's more of a spiritual perfection. That's where you're coming from. What you have to do, I think, is to recognize from a place of soul, people are just human beings and they make mistakes all the time. We make mistakes all the time. That's where we are in our souls. We develop our souls as much through our mistakes as we do through anything that we achieve. So you see, there are two different things. Yes, you can focus if you want on achievement and being perfect and all of that. That has a place if it isn't too much. If it's too strong, it tends to become sadomasochistic. That means it hurts the child. You don't need that. But when you care for the soul, you want the child to be himself or herself. Understand that the child's life and personality comes out of their soul. It's like it rises up out of their deep soul. So if you want them to be a happy, rich, creative person, you don't impose your ideas on them, but rather you tend that thing, that little core of who they are, and let it grow and develop with a lot of mistakes along the way.
How, because it's difficult even for ourselves. I mean, how do we know? Because it's so difficult to describe, the soul itself. So how do we know if this is soul talking, or this is, I don't know, laziness talking, or this is lack of experience talking? Like, even in ourselves as parents, how do I know if this something that manifests inside me, it's about my soul, or it's about, I don't know, some fear from my own childhood? How do I distinguish which is soul and which is not?
Well, I think there are lots of ways to do that. If you want to be a good parent, you have to prepare yourself.
Mm.
You can't do it, as many people say in their books, you can't do it unconsciously.
Mm.
If you just say, okay, I'm going to be a parent now, I'm not going to think about it, I can just do it, it's natural. It isn't.
Mm.
It requires reflection and thought. So you have to understand that. And so you can prepare yourself by doing some good reading or looking at some interviews or follow some teachers. There are a lot of good teachers around that you could follow to get at least some ideas about it. They won't use the language of soul. That's what I do, following a certain tradition, but you don't have to. So that's one thing, preparing for it and doing it then with more intention and awareness. That's a first step. And then if you could learn something, I would suggest, from my point of view, if you could understand something about the soul, it's a very deep thing. It's what you are doing in caring for your child's soul is the very core of who they are. And it's when they're children, it's hardly visible. It's just being revealed piece by piece. And if they need anything, it's to be affirmed and supported in who they are as they try to become themselves. And from the soul, you're going to be individuated, Jung says. You're going to be an individual. And that means you're not going to be like everybody else. And the parent has to deal with that my child is not like everyone else.
Mm-hmm. I asked yesterday someone, how do we even know who we are? I mean, if I had to define myself, who I am, and if I had to look through it, lots of those things would have been influenced from other people into my life since I was born. Like, you are born in a certain family. That certain family has, its history, culture, traditions, their thoughts and beliefs, which we pass on to their children, even if they don't do that ill-intended. I mean, but just how it is, we are all evolve in a relationship, and we are fruit of, I don't know, a lots of experience into that relationship. So when you say who they are, my question is, if we evolve in a relationship, so we somehow are the result of also others people, who they are.
Yeah.
How do I distinguish who I am or who my child is?
You have to, it's a gradual thing. Let's say your child is born. Mm-hmm. And see, one of the things I've done in my career, I've worked with childbirth, with people dealing with childbirth, and see how the role of the parent begins at the very beginning or even before the child is born. And so to be able to have that deep commitment to a child, to this person as an individual from the beginning. I know from myself, a parent of my daughter. Right now, my daughter is a world-known musician. She sings all over the world and brings her band, and she's also a teacher, kind of a soul teacher at the same time. She knows all this work that I've done. And when she was growing up, my feeling was, I'm going to relax and support her in see what the odd things that she might be interested in and things that she might get into, and pay close attention and be able to distinguish, as you were saying before, my own needs from hers. You know, do I need a child who succeeds in mathematics or something? If I do, what happens if this child doesn't have that gift? You have to get to know who that child is by what they can do and what they can't do, what they say, the things that excite them and the things that make them sad over time. And there are little hints. For example, one hint from my daughter, when she was about 5 years old, she brought me a big telephone book with telephone numbers in, very big, and she could hardly carry it. And she asked me to find the local orphanage, and so that she could call and make sure the children were all right. I thought, this is something deep within her. This is starting out at 5 years old. And she continues now as a world traveler to care for young people. That's her mission, to help young people. And she had that when she was 5 years old. Now it wasn't clear how she would live that out as an adult, but it was there, like a seed, it was there. So I think that's, a parent's got to think that way, to see the signs and to support that, even if it goes against your own understanding and you think, I'd like something else. So, and the other thing that you were just saying, I think that's part of it, is that, you know, we are definitely influenced by our parents and our relatives and experiences we have when we're young. And sorting those out is part of the work of tending your soul. But when I do it, I don't take it literally. I don't just look for the cause of what's going on with the person now. What I do is I pay attention to their dreams. And I see these early events and early characters in their dreams. And in that form, they are less literal. They're not so just this person who has affected my child. They are more of a dream figure in a way. For example, if an adult dreams about their mother, telling them, warning them about something they're doing, saying, don't do it. I'm not going to say that their parent is the problem, the cause of their problem. I'm going to say that the mothering in a big sense is an issue that they have to deal with. And one mother they have encountered is their actual mother. But they have probably encountered other people, men sometimes too, who might act the role of mother, might mother them quite a bit. And they could explore all these different experiences of mother and get closer to what that mother spirit is doing in them. So I'm not so literal in dealing with the experiences from childhood, but I do take them very seriously.
That's true. You talk about a book a lot about mythology and how it helps us to maybe take a step back and to experience what's happening through the lens of all this collective human experience that we had so far. And the example you just gave us, it's about that. It's like we could talk about real mom that I had and high influence in my life. I could talk about all the other mothers that I had maybe in a person of my husband or my friends or my colleagues or, anyone.
Yes, exactly. Mythology, I use it. I don't talk about it with my clients or too much with my students because I don't want to get, sometimes they don't really grasp it. So what I do, I keep it in my mind for myself, and it helps a great deal. So if I see that there's some client of mine in therapy who is having trouble with love and relationship, the love aspect or the sexual aspect of their relationship, my understanding of the goddess, let's say in Greek mythology, which is what I use mainly, Aphrodite or Aphrodite, I feel that those stories and that figure as a power in the world, as something that happens in human life, it helps me appreciate what this person's going through. It's a deeper understanding of what's happening in human life. We're looking for, in my work, what we call it is archetypal. So we're looking for an archetypal basis. In this case, it would be, for example, with the mother, the archetypal mother, not just the personal mother. That means this mother you encounter in people all over the place. What does that do to you, and how has it affected your life? Now, your personal mother may have been a big part of that archetypal mother, but not the whole story. There's more to it, and we take it deeper that way. That's why we call what I do archetypal psychology.
But I think that helps in the relationship, because one thing is to say to what you think about my child as, you know, you are an ungrateful kid. And another thing is to say, at least in my mind, oh, you're having this joyful Apollon phase, you know, whatever it is. I mean, depends on how deep we are in Greek mythology and how we know all those. But it kind of gives this distance, and it doesn't make the experience personal. It's just like, okay, so I'm in this phase. Okay, so I get it through the myth, you know, I get the implication of that.
Yes, that you're absolutely right. It makes it less personal.
Yes.
And therefore, it doesn't interfere so much. You don't blame anybody. It's not about blame. It's about, interestingly, finding the roots of the experience, something deeper. What's going on here? I think the same applies to being a parent. So there's sort of, you can say there's an archetypal parent. You know, it's like, okay, it's one thing to have a role of parent. So now I'm a father or a mother. But part of it is that you represent a much bigger sense of a mother or father. So I know that my daughter will run into people throughout her life that will add to her experience of a father. She will meet other people who give father spirit to her. And she, of course, she's got a lot from me, but she will get more of it. And so it's not my personal influence on her so much as that I evoke for her the archetypal father that is partly in her then, so that she can father her own life as she goes. She doesn't need someone outside of her. She can have a good, strong sense of fathering her own life. I think that's very, very important.
And for us as parents, it also gives this sense of belonging. Like there has been like millions and billions of people who had already played this role, parents' role, and they all have been in this, I don't know, strong and angry Poseidon role, or, you know, whatever it is. That this is not about me. It's about me, but it's also through this stage of the moment I'm in, I could relate with all the parents that have been and all the parents that will be.
Yes, that's right. That's a big part. It's not the whole story, but it's a big part of that archetypal parent. All the parents, people, everyone, so many, you know, how many billions of people have been parents. So we have a lot of examples, or we have a lot of people who have influenced us that way. But I think that the thing is, you don't have to be determined by your own parents. In other words, you can explore the idea of being a mother or father and do it your own way, and do it in this deep way, so that it's not just a role to play, but it's an identity that you take on, and it's something very deep and much bigger than yourself. I think that this is something that parents could benefit from, to see that becoming a father and mother. It's too bad we don't have rituals for it to help us enter a new phase where now I'm going to be a parent, and I'm not just myself. The trouble with a lot of parents, I think, is when they're relating to their children, they relate unconsciously, and they just blurt out whatever they feel. And that doesn't work very well. Another way I look at this goes back to the book Soul Therapy, because in that book, I say that therapy takes place not only in an office of a therapist, but also among friends and family members. And we are therapists for each other in a certain sense. And I think parents can be therapeutic at times. They can be therapists for their children once in a while, and I don't mean to play at being their psychologist. What I mean is that in a deep way, you can speak therapeutically to the child. Let's say a child is really screaming and can't be controlled. And you might scream back because you're so frustrated. But if you remember, wait a minute now, it's not me. I'm a parent at this point, and I can speak therapeutically to my child. I can speak and not in just a natural, unconscious way. I can speak in such a way that will help them. And that is, it's like becoming a therapist for a moment. I think that it would help parents to learn how to think that way.
I remember one scene, we were visiting like my son's friends, and he got upset because the friend who we were visiting wasn't sharing his toys, and he was really upset and he got angry. And as his mom, at that moment, I felt overwhelmed. And then my friend, my friend, the boy's mom, stepped in, and he looked my son in the eyes and he told him, "You are angry, and I would also be angry in your place because my son is not sharing his toys with you." And I felt the atmosphere shift in the room. He went from being angry to, I don't know, it's even hard to describe with words, but I felt that he somehow felt lighter and relieved because someone really got what he was going through. Like someone really got that, I don't know, saw his soul, I guess, in that moment. Like he was really angry and hurt because someone wouldn't share the toy with him. And I felt like even his shoulders, he went like, whoop, and we went down.
Yeah.
So that's about therapeutical moment, right? That's about talking in that therapeutical mode to our kids.
Yeah. Yes. In a way, what he did, if I could say this, he took the role of Carl Rogers for a moment, the client-centered therapy, where all you do is let people know what's happening, what they have said, and what they have done. And that itself is calming. Like you don't have to add anything brilliant to it. You just have to let the person know what they're experiencing. And besides, how many times in the history of humanity have children got upset when another child took their toy? It's happened billions of times.
Mm.
This is what children do.
Mm.
This is not any problem of your child. This is an archetypal event. It's a child complaining that someone has used their toy or taken their toy. This happens to almost every child, maybe every child. So you don't want to see it as what's wrong with my child? How can I correct this child? Rather you see, oh, this is happening. This is what children do. Let me see if I can relate to this problem that way, instead of trying to either, punish my child or correct them.
Mm. I hear many people say that they don't know what they are or what their essence is, and that somehow they knew maybe at the beginning, but when they become parents and they don't know it anymore, like I don't know, the whole world changed, or no, we could call it also middle life crisis, I guess. But I mean, at some point we are contemplating ourselves and we don't know anymore like anything about ourselves. So as adults, how could we start to discovering our soul or our essence? Where do we start and how do we do that?
Well, you do it from the very beginning. I think, first of all, what you do is you try to live life. You try to live your life forward. You don't hide from life. You try to really have some courage and go into whatever life is offering you. I think that's really very, very important for a soul-centered life. You don't try to create your own life, and you don't try to follow an image that you think is good or acceptable. You look for the signs of what's going to happen. I don't want to talk about myself too much, but I did, in my life, I started out being in this monastic life. I was a monk until I was 26. And one morning I woke up when I was 26, and I realized that I didn't have that spirit anymore. It wasn't in me to continue. So I left. I just walked out. And people said, why don't you stay for a year just to figure it out? And I said, no, I know that it's over now. So I have followed, at least that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to follow these promptings, what my feelings are, and what is a sense of something urging me on in my life. And I followed that and made changes as things went on. And it worked out pretty well for me. And I think that this is also in the tradition, to follow the signs in your life and to follow urges that you can sense as direction in them. You sense that they are giving you direction. You can think that, you can sense that if you spend some time and get to know yourself, that some urges really are, you can see that inside them, there is this idea that this is moving your life forward. So you do it, even though you don't know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
You trust as you go. So I think as you do that, you shape you get a lot of confidence and strength from that way. And you become somebody then. You become a person over time. And you won't be much of a person. Maybe you won't know that whole person when you're 17 years old, but maybe in so-called midlife crisis, I think they happen all the time myself. But anyway, if you have that kind of a crisis about yourself, you're moving further in the completion of that seed that was there in the beginning and that you experienced in these various crossroads where you had to make decisions. I think that way, if you trust that and trust in life and move ahead, you have a strong sense of self. If you don't trust life, then you're going to have to work at it a little more.
How did you know at that time that it wasn't boredom that was talking? Like, how do you know that that was authentic you and not some kind of, I don't know, boredom?
Can't you get to know yourself enough to know when you're feeling bored as opposed to feeling something else? I mean, you just have to look, and you don't need, you won't get any absolute final statement about it, but you will be able to sort it out. You have to sort it out. So in some decisions in life, it may be very difficult. And so you go through a lot of struggle to make the decision. Let's say people just often deciding whether or not they should get married or get divorced. It's a really tough one. And it may take a long time to know where you are in that, what your life is calling you to do. So it's not always easy. That was an easy one for me, but sometimes they're very difficult. So you give them time and eventually sort them out. And what you can't get 100%, but I figure if you get maybe 60%, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And how, I mean, from one side, it's normal to get, I guess, resistance, because we all resist change. I mean, we all rather be in a comfort zone than go somewhere else where we don't know what awaits for us. But you told that the part of knowing is about getting to know ourselves and knowing how to sort through those different, even fears, because it could be fear that says, I mean, don't go there, don't go there. It could be fear that says, okay, I'm willing to go out. I'm still a little bit, afraid. But so how do you get to know yourself? What does that look in the daily life like?
One thing you can do is go to therapy.
Okay.
This is my job in a way. What I do with my clients when they get to a point like that, I help them sort that out. I can't tell them what to do, but I can help them sort things out. And if they're not sure if their resistance to making a change in life is fear, or whether it's just something they have to pay attention to, I help them with that. We sort that out. We go through other experiences they've had, maybe similar. We look at their dream life. The dreams help a great deal. They give a lot of information about that. So you can do, I think, as I say in my book, everyone should be in therapy. It does help if you have a good therapist, a kind of a depth-oriented therapist. If not, then you might work on yourself a bit. Do something to deepen yourself as a person. So you might want to go on retreat sometimes. As I said before, you might find hear a good teacher. I think a lot of people go to teachers that are not so good, but if you can find a really good teacher, it sounds pretty good for you. Or do some reading that's really solid reading. Again, there's a lot of bad stuff out there, but really solid reading, all of that can help. Talking it over with friends, talking with friends deeply, that's a big part. If you could have a friend or two or a relative who you think is pretty solid, that might help. And, sorry, my phone's ringing all day today. So I think that this idea of having somebody to talk to and take it seriously, see that it's seriously, I think that's a big part of the process. It's what it is. It's that you're not just living day to day without thinking about your life. You're doing something to cultivate your life, cultivate your person, so that you become somebody in that process. There are many ways of doing it. The arts can help, and more indirectly maybe, but the experience of the arts. Like one thing I do is I play the piano every day. And I think that does a lot for me. It gives me a calm and a perspective, and the music actually teaches me some things when I'm playing it. So I find the arts to be a very important resource for this kind of cultivating oneself into being a person, a real person, instead of just living blindly and unconsciously.
You say in your book, the symptoms lead the way. They tell us what the soul needs and points towards a solution. And this is a very new approach, because usually we tend to, even in therapy, we tend to, erase symptoms. We tend to cure them. But you say, no, let's keep the symptoms at least for a while, because thanks to the symptoms, we can know what the soul really needs. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe give us some examples so we could see what you are trying to say?
Yes, I'll try to. This is something I talk about a lot. I get this from James Hillman and his close friend of his, Pat Barry, who wrote about this. And he and I, when James Hillman and I used to work together, we would often bring this up about keeping the symptom, preserving it, honoring it. And the idea is simply that when we have things that are bothering us, we might call them a complex, something that is really in our way. One that I like to use, an example I like to use, is the dependence. A lot of people are concerned about being too dependent in their relationships. And so what they do is let's say someone comes to a therapist and says, I'm so dependent. I get into a relationship and my own will is gone, and I just do whatever the other person wants to do, and I never feel I'm myself. So that's the symptom. The symptom is that they are too dependent. Now, they would like to come to me, let's say a therapist, and get rid of that. So it doesn't happen anymore. And they would like to be independent, the opposite. They would like to be the opposite. I want to be more independent. But as we explore it, as I don't rush into doing what the person wants, I don't do that. I'll say, let's take some time and explore this and see what's really going on. And as we do, we find that this person who is so dependent all the time actually has a very, very independent side to them that is hidden, that is not there. And actually, that is what is causing the problem more often. And so what we do is we discover through conversation, some lengthy conversation usually, that this is more subtle and complicated than it appears. And the thing to do is that the symptom is telling us what needs to be done. Actually, this person has to discover how to be dependent in a way that doesn't hurt them. It's not about getting rid of dependence, it's about having it and having it more deeply. And maybe that dependence was just refusal to really relate to somebody, you know, to keep at a distance. And that's why they couldn't have a good relationship. So you have to be very careful and look at these things. And so what I'm saying is that most of the time, the symptom tells us which direction we need to go in.
So let's say we have a mom who comes to see you and she's all about, you know, I am all about fulfilling my children's needs and there is no myself in a relationship. Like as long as my children are around me, I'm non-existent. And then help me, please help me to stay present. So how does that look like in a daily life? Like what is she supposed to do? Like be even more of service to her children?
Yes. If it's a big problem and she's feeling very upset about it, the chances are it's not that being a parent is not very comfortable. She's not comfortable in being a parent. Mm-hmm. So what she has to do is learn how to become a parent in a much deeper way. And she will not have so much anxiety about it and won't feel that she's herself as a person is being overlooked and not given any space. That's because if it's not given any space, it's because you're not really being parent in a good way, in a way that really comes from deep inside you. Maybe you've never really made that shift from being single to being a parent. If you are basically a single person trying to be a parent, you're going to have trouble because, that's not who you are anymore. You have to go through the initiation into really being a parent. And then you can do it in a way that's more comfortable. And it will resolve some of these issues that come up otherwise.
So what would you tell her? Like where to begin? Like what does that even mean being or shift into a parent?
I would say, tell me, I would want to know some stories. See, therapy is all about narrative and stories. I'd want to know some stories. What was going on when she found out she was going to be a parent? Mm. Was she prepared for this? What did she have to go through? A difficult transformation to be a parent? Did she actually make that shift, or is she still that person who was carefree and single person who now has children dependent on her? Has she actually made that shift deep inside her? And how can we do that? And have there been examples of parenting that have affected her? Maybe that she didn't want to get caught in, so she resists being a parent, quite unconsciously, quite subtly, resists being a parent. So as we talk about it, a lot of those hidden sort of underground thoughts and fantasies come to the surface. And then the person can make a choice and say, do I really want to enter into this phase of life where I'm a parent? Do I really want to let go of what I had before, at least to the extent that I need to, and enter into this life and really, really be a parent?
I have one more question for you about your own parenthood journey. What was the most difficult part for you?
That's a good question. Let's see. I would say I think it was difficult in various moments. I had thought about children a lot and raising children. I had many ideas about it. And I still do about education. I still apply all those. And I'd read a lot. And I found the reality very different. In other words, some things I wish my children would have wanted to do, they didn't want to do. And constantly, this going on constantly, many, many times. I think it's a lot about, for me, it was a lot about my hopes and expectations that sounded so good to me as parenting, as good parenting. I had to adjust to the people that my children actually were. And that meant giving up something of myself as I went. And I didn't understand that was part of parenting.
Mm. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time and your wisdom. Could you tell people where we can find you, where we can buy your books, or even, connect with you?
Well, you can buy my books anywhere that you buy books. They're available anywhere. And by the way, if I may say so, I have a new book coming out.
Oh, yes.
In next month, in May 23rd, a new book called, it's called The Eloquence of Silence. It's about the spiritual idea of emptiness, but applied to ordinary life. And it's mainly stories. So that book's coming up. And you can find out about these things at my website, thomasmoresoul.com, thomasmoresoul.com. And otherwise, I can say that I teach an online course that is described on my website. And that's something that people want to go deeper into what I was talking about today. You can do it that way. Otherwise, I give a lot of talks online, and they can be found at my website.
Okay, I'm gonna put your website in the notes, so keep.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And go there.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and have a lovely snowy day.
I will have a snowy day, and thank you so much for inviting me and for having such a nice conversation today.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.